Okay, what I want to do today is get started. We just, off the recording, we talked about how to get portable apps running. If you're having issues with portable apps, I'll help you with that after this recording. What I want to start with today is creating and populating database tables. This is what you've been waiting for, I know. You got all this theory about database design, and then you're going to get out there in the real world, and nobody's going to let you design databases unless they're for yourself or for a project that you're doing for somebody else. Then you have to design your own databases, and the better your database design, the more flexible it'll be, etc. But once we've got it designed, now we're going to learn how to use SQL. And I'm still 5 years later calling it SQL, because once upon a time there was something else, a different language called SQL, but that one went away. So now this is SQL. Some people call it SQL, some people call it SQL. Doesn't matter. It's all the same stuff. There are pages in the book that correspond to what we're talking about here, so you can look at some of the book examples as well. SQL is a standard, semi-standard language. All versions of SQL are not alike. Access SQL is different than MySQL, is different than Oracle. They're different than my Microsoft SQL Server, but they're all very similar. So there's little nuances that you have to learn, but most of what you'll learn here will transfer from one language to another, or one version to another. We're going to use MySQL because it's open source. It's also very popular on the web. As I said, it comes free with most web servers. So or web hosts, if you purchase a web hosting from someplace like I did at Fat Cow, it will come with a MySQL database already there, or a MySQL server already there. The databases you get to build. So it's good for that. It's also portable, unlike Microsoft Access, which isn't very portable. Microsoft SQL Server is not portable at all. Nice thing about this is portable, so that's why we're using it, to get some practice. You already know how to get your own. You can install it on your desktop or your laptop. Kind of follow what we did in the lab, but instead of installing it on a flash drive, install it on your desktop. And then you'll have to find the shortcut icon to launch it. All of this can be done on a desktop, actually on the Mac. That's where I'll be doing it today. I'm still playing a little bit with the virtual machine, but probably after today, I'll be doing all my SQL in the SQL workbench, but on a Mac version of it. So it looks slightly different, but it behaves exactly the same. In my notes, all the SQL keywords are blue and uppercase. That's not required in the language. SQL is case insensitive. So you can type use with uppercase, mixed case, whatever you want to do, doesn't matter, it'll recognize it. All right, so I put a stupid capital S in between here. I still don't get an error. That's fine. So SQL is not case sensitive in the commands. It is, however, case sensitive, or it can be case sensitive when you're comparing strings. If you're looking for Volcker, capital V might be different depending on the circumstances than a little v. So be careful with that. Everything else in here, I put TBL prefixes on stuff. I stopped putting them on my tables, the actual table names. But in my notes where I'm giving you guidelines, I still put TBLs to let you know this is where the table name goes. MySQL has an annoying habit of converting all of your database names and all of your table names to all lowercase. So you can type them in lovely camel case and it'll tell you that's nice, and it makes them all lowercase. A couple of my students don't like that. There are ways to change it. You can go into the ini file and change, but the reason they do this is to make it portable across different operating systems like Linux, like Windows. So I recommend you leave it alone and just tolerate it. Table names start looking a little goofy because they're not camelback, but all the field names, they stick. Whatever you call them, whatever you create them with, they will stick. But database names and tables, MySQL automatically makes all lowercase. Some of my other students last year didn't like that, so they started putting underscores between the names. So if you have a Marina Slips table, they put underscores in between. I don't think it's that bad. As in programming logic the other day, anything you see in square brackets in my notes is optional. You don't have to include it. So you don't put the square brackets in if you use it. They're just a way for me to designate in my notes that this thing, part of the command, is optional. All right, so one of the first things we're going to learn to do is create a database, or as MySQL calls it, a schema. Same thing. There is a create schema command as well. You can use either one. I tend to go with database. So if we wanted to create our own database, we would simply say, and you can follow along if you wish, create database. Notice that the SQL browser or the SQL workbench does syntax highlight, does have autocomplete. Sometimes, like in this case, it can be wrong. There is no databases command, create databases. It's just trying to help you out. If you don't like it, you can turn that off. I leave it on. Occasionally it comes in handy, but most of the time it doesn't help much in SQL. Then we have to give the database or the schema itself a name. And at this point, I'm giving it a name. Why is it giving me suggestions here? This is more annoying sometimes than it's worth. Again, if you go into the preferences, you can turn off the suggestion mode here. Let's just make create a database for Premier, and let's capitalize it just so you can see it's not going to make any difference. Premier products. And that's it. So creating databases is pretty straightforward. If you're running in Windows, and all of you should be, if you press Control-Enter, it's the same as clicking on this little guy here. Before the recording started, I mentioned that these two icons run SQL. This one runs every single command in the window. So you could have dozens of commands in here. It's called a SQL procedure, kind of like a method. So you could have dozens of commands in here and with one click, run them all. As long as there's no errors, it'll run them all. If it hits an error in the middle or somewhere, it quits. I think this little guy here, I've never used it, will tell it to keep going anywhere. As you hit an error, skip that command, go on to the next one, keep going. If there's an error, I try to fix it. So that's what this one does. More often than not, you'll be using this version of it, which says run the command that includes the cursor. In Windows, Control-Enter does exactly the same thing. Some commands like creating databases don't generate any results. Very soon we're going to generate a list of all the records in a table. And we'll see those in a different window. But any commands that don't generate results, as in output for the viewer, for the human to see, you'll get feedback down here at the bottom of the screen. You should see a little green check mark. And this says one row affected. What? One row? What's a row? Also known as? Record. What record? There's no table. Remember, there's a database of databases? In MySQL, there's a database of databases, and we just added a record to the database of databases. Good news is, from our perspective, you don't care about the database of databases, but that explains why one row was affected, and that took forever. 0.08 of a second. Oh my God. Good thing I wasn't in a hurry today. So over here now in my schema list, I should be able to see, where is it? One of the annoying things about this schema list is when you execute commands that create schemas, that create things that should appear over here, this doesn't update automatically. We could shut down the workbench and relaunch it, but what's much easier is the refresh button up here at the top of the schema list. Okay, and notice, at least in my version, some of these versions are a little different. I have management and schema tabs down here at the bottom. Sometimes those are stacked on top of each other. I haven't quite figured out different ways to arrange these, but here's my schema list. If you refresh it, there's Premier Products. So if you issue a command and you expect to see it over here, and this is kind of like a directory of all your databases, and we can also see tables. And once we get inside the tables, we can see fields, columns. What the heck are those? German. MySQL is a German product, actually, so that's year, and I'm not sure what that is. Yeah.
Quick question. How do you get rid of management, instance, and performance called schemas?
Above them?
Yeah.
Experiment. How's that? You could try right-clicking them and see if they close. This looks like a minimize button maybe. I don't know, experiment. You can also resize them so that you can see your schemas. What'd you find?
The little arrows.
The little arrows got rid of them. Okay, there you go. But they probably, did they tuck down underneath here?
Yes.
Why don't I know that? Because I did it once. And remember that the SQL Workbench and XAMPP, all those leave a little footprint, SQL Workbench particularly, leaves a little footprint on your actual computer, not on your USB stick, but on the actual computer, in this case, my virtual machine. Leaves a footprint with all my settings. So every time I come back to this virtual machine, doesn't matter which USB stick I plug in, I still get this size 14 font. I still get this management schema collapsed. So I can switch back and forth between them, and that's why I forget how to do this stuff, because I never see it again. And I have not bothered to figure out where the heck all this SQL stuff is stored so I could go delete it. All right, so that creates a database. Let's practice one more. Create database Henry Books. Oh, by the way, notice Premier Products, all lowercase. So don't even bother with the shift key when you're developing databases and tables, because the table names and the database names are going to be put to lowercase anyways, so I don't even type them that way. Henry Books. Control Enter, or I'll click the arrow this time with a lightning bolt. Does exactly the same thing, and I get my little green check mark, positive feedback, create database Henry Books. If you have a syntax error, it won't run. You don't have to follow here, but if I put an S on there, now I get a list saying, oh, that's a good word, but what do you mean you want to create databases? No, we don't do that. It thinks the create command is wrong. If I try to run this, I get a little red X down here saying I couldn't do that. You have an error in your syntax, check the manual. Oh, that's helpful. If you go to the manual for SQL, get ready. It's huge. Don't go to the manual, go to my notes, look at samples, other SQL commands that you've done, and try to figure out what's wrong with your databases. Oh, there we go. If I try to create the database again, I get another error saying you can't create that database or it exists. At least that error is a little more friendly. What do you mean it exists? Where is it? Refresh. And there's Henry Books. Congratulations, you're SQLing. If for some reason you need to transfer this database to a different computer, meaning not on your stick, there are ways using MySQL, and MySQL's gotten much better, to export entire databases. Meaning the database, all the table definitions, all the data that's in those tables, a couple of clicks, and you can export an entire huge monster database. Thursday, I will show you how to import. Actually, it might be next week. I'll show you how to import an entire database so that we don't have to type all that stuff in. We can have some databases to play with. I will give you SQL procedures that already have all the commands, and all you have to do is import them, run them, and poof, you get a database all full. How to do that is explained in that set of handouts. It's on my website in case you ever need to do it. It's primarily there to help me remember how to do it, because I don't do it that often. Show databases is not real terribly handy because we can see all the databases over here. But if you issue the command, notice now it's databases. There's results. Notice where the results go. They go in the middle. If your command has results, they go in the middle. If they don't have results, then all you get, and even if they do have results, you still get your green checkmark feedback over here. Result windows can be closed with the X, I think. Yep. If they get in your way, you can close them. If you issue another command that doesn't have results, the results window automatically goes away. This guy down here, if you're lucky, you can close it, but I usually leave this one open because that's where my error messages show up. Yep. Some versions, these little guys up here that close window panes, they don't work. In my office, that one just does not want to work. Don't know why. But I normally have this one open. The results show up in here. If you got a nice big monitor, you got plenty of room. These are all resizable. So just find the sizing arrow and you can resize them and see the results. I also occasionally like to click down here, right click, excuse me, and clear this out. Clears out all the previous messages. They tend to scroll, and the one you're looking for is always at the bottom. Sometimes that's annoying, so you can clear those. There's a show databases command. In programming, I haven't used that one much. Normally I've got something like this that shows me a list of the databases that I have. If you're playing around, you want to get rid of a database, you can drop them. So let's now drop database. Why do I have to say database? Because the drop command is also used for tables. So later on we'll drop tables, and so you have to tell it what to drop. Drop the database. Let's do Premier Products. Now at the bottom, we got my green check mark, and it says 0 rows affected. It's sometimes a little confusing. 0 rows means it didn't do anything. Well, let's find out. It's already gone over here. So when I dropped it, it looks like it went away. Let's practice, do it again for Henry Books. Interesting, when you drop them, they disappear right away. When you add them, you have to request them. It's time for me to send an email to my SQL org there. Occasionally that comes in handy, but normally if I want to drop a database, I'm going to go over here and say, I don't want that test database anymore. You can right click, and here's a drop command that does exactly the same thing. It actually warns you, you sure you want to drop this thing? Test is okay. If you want to drop it, I keep it around. It occasionally gives me something to play around in. But CD call is just a CD collection. That's all that is. And it's got 2 CDs in it and German field names. So may not be very valuable to you. You can get rid of those if you wish. But now we're back to where we started. I think I'm supposed to create one more here now. Let's make this a little wider so I can see. Drop it, and then create a lexamara. So let's practice one more time. And this is also legal, by the way. I'm going to go up here. And I double click on Premier Products, and just like in Microsoft Word, it selects the word when you double click, and then I can type lexamara and press Control Enter, and it'll execute that command. So you can recycle commands here. So you don't have to do quite so much copying and pasting or retyping. And now it's created lexamara, refresh. There it is. Don't do that when you're doing your homework assignments, however, because now you overwrote question number 3, and I can't grade it. You can highlight, copy, and paste, and do all that here as well. When you do your homework assignments, I would like you to do this. This is a comment in MySQL. Look familiar? Never seen it before. No, the // does not work. But when you're working on question number 1, just type in a comment, and then here's my answer, and then question number 2, answer, question number 3, answer, and so on. So what I'd like you to do for your homework assignments. Whenever you're ready, you can save this, and it will save these exact characters into a text file with the SQL extension. Okay. It's pure text. You can open it in Notepad, you can open it in Word, but it has an SQL extension to designate that it's an SQL file. When you open that in here, then it automatically syntax highlights and all the rest of that good stuff. All right, that's boring. Let's do something real. Oh, okay. Now I want to use lexamara Marina. Okay. I can double click it or issue that use command. And again, to prove that this is case insensitive, I'm just going to type it all uppercase, and it won't make any difference. And notice over on the left-hand side in the schema list, it is automatically bold-faced it for me and expanded it so I can see what's inside. And right now there's no tables because there's no arrow next to it. This is the part that I always forget. I open up SQL Server and I start entering in commands for Henry Books, and I'm not using Henry Books yet. What database am I using? I don't know. You'll get an error down at the bottom saying there's no such table in this database, and you go, oh, geez, forgot to double-click the database or hit the use command in the database. Let's do something constructive. Let's build a table. You are working right now on database designs. Once those designs are done and you have a data dictionary, a big chunk of that data dictionary can be used to create the tables in your database. We need to know for every, first of all, we issue the create table command, but that's not the end of it. You must say create table and then your table name. Doesn't matter how you capitalize it because it's going to make it lower. MySQL is going to make it lowercase. But that's not the end of the command. We then, in a set of parentheses, there's a parenthesis here and there's a parenthesis here. And what you'll typically see me do is create table and then the next lines are indented so that I can see that these are subsets of that, the continuation of the previous command. You can stretch these out, go all the way across the screen if you want to, but that makes it real hard for you to read and me to grade. So I normally move down. But there are parentheses around a field list. This is a list of fields that are in that table. How do you know what fields are in your table? It's in the data dictionary. So let's start. Now I'm going to get in trouble because I want to see two parts of this and I can't. Let's do this. Yep.
When you saved it, where did you save it to?
Wherever you want. It doesn't. It'll pop up a save dialog box and you can put it wherever you want. The SQL command is just a file that's got your SQL save text in it. Okay. I'm not going to be, unlike programming class, I'm not going to be saving what I do here. It's in the recording. It's in my notes. These are all just a bunch of samples that I'm throwing up there, and I'm going to be messing around with them and saving them. It's just junk for the most part. So I don't save documents to put up on OneDrive for you to look at. But the good news is the syntax is not that hard. The notes should help, and if you really get stuck, the recordings. Come on, not hard. Thank you. All right, so let's create our first table. Let's call it marinas. So underneath here, and just so you can see it better, I'm going to push it up. I'm going to use the create table marinas command, but I'm not done yet. What I will often do is, just like in C#, I will put the open parenthesis on the same line, just like I do with curly brackets. And then so I don't forget, I'm going to the end and I'm going to type parentheses semicolon. My field list goes between those parentheses. And so here's the beginning of the command, there's the end of the command, in between I press tab and indent. When we're defining fields, we have to, like in programming, define at least two pieces of information. What do you want to call it? And then what data type is it? Right. So here, we start with the name, unlike, careful, Walker, got too many languages running through my head. Isn't the type first in C#? Yeah. So here it's the other way around, just to confuse all us programmers. Okay. Field name first, then it's data type. And then, notice the square brackets, some optional stuff. If you want the field to be required, you put in not null, 2 words. If you want this field to be a single, the only primary key in this table, you put the word primary key, 2 words. If you want it to be an auto increment field, you put in auto increment with the underscore. This is a keyword, you don't get to mess with it. But all of those are optional. Or you can put them in any combination, though normally you don't put not null with primary key because primary keys by default are not null. Can't have a null primary key. So our first field in this table is the Marina ID, I believe. Yep. So the field name is Marina ID. Now capitalized appropriately. Field names, MySQL leaves alone, so capitalize them the same way you did in the data dictionary, which should be camel case. And then it's type. We'll talk more about types next time. But trust me, there's a type int because this is an auto number field, right? So it's always type int. If you wish, you can type integer. There are all those other integers there. I don't even mess with them. I just use int, just like in C#. There might be 3 or 4 different versions of int, but I make it simple, and particularly for auto number fields. This field is my primary key. And it is auto, and I always mess this up, increment, because I believe in Access it's called auto number. But here it's auto increment. That's field number 1, comma. Put commas between your fields. Next field is my marina name. Follow my design. This is not the exact design, by the way. It just says name, okay? So name, and if it's text, there's 2 kinds. There's char and varchar. We'll see this next time. Varchar is a variable string length. Char is a fixed string length. So you'd use char for zip code, for instance, assuming you want 5 digits all the time. If you don't type in 5 digits, a char field automatically fills with spaces, and that is a waste. Varchar, in this case for the marina name, will flex. We have to, and in your database design, you've already said that it's going to be a certain size. In parentheses after varchar, you put the size. In parentheses after char, for zip code, you put in the size, 5. Integers don't need a size. At this point, let's quit. Control Enter. And down at the bottom, I got green circles. If you got any red squiggles or red balls, try to figure out what's different between yours and mine. And let's enter 1 more command, 2 more. Describe marinas. I don't think I need the word table there. Nope. If you say describe marinas, it will show you what's inside. So if you've forgotten, you can ask. If we refresh over here on the schema list, can drop it down, there's marinas, here's the columns, doesn't give you a whole lot of information, but I bet if I dug down hard enough or clicked on it, down here it tells me. Can't see it very well. But down there it's telling me the marina ID is an int 11. Auto increment, primary key. So if you don't want to do a describes, you can find most of the information you need just by clicking and looking down here under information. But this occasionally comes in handy when you're running. If you're writing a program and your program's not working and you don't have access to the database directly, you can run a describe command and have the database tell you what the structure of the table looks like. We're not done yet. Adding fields to a table is difficult. That's unit 6 or something. So let's get rid of it. Drop table marinas, and we'll review it next time when we come back. And now if I don't even have to refresh it or read it. So what we're looking at here is another language, right? That's really all it is. It's got its own syntax. The bad news is it's got if statements and loops and switch statements and all that stuff we hate so much. The good news is we're not going that far. We don't have the time. And most of the time you don't need it. But it is possible to write SQL procedures, kind of like methods, that have if statements and loops and all kinds of stuff in them to do things if that's really what you need them to do. It's beyond the scope of this course, however. All we're going to do is create tables, put data in, that's this chapter, get the data back out, that's the next 2 chapters, and then modify the data that's in there, all that CRUD processing. Create them, read them, update them, and potentially delete records. So that's what we're going to cover, and that'll keep us pretty busy until May. Questions?
Why didn't it show anything after you dropped the table?
It does down here,
Right, it does down there.
and it also wiped it out over here, right?
But it doesn't actually show it where you typed it.
Show what?
Show that it's been dropped, like
It does, because it doesn't have any output. When it drops, there's no output. There's no results to show you because the table's gone. There's nothing for it to show
Right,
you.
it
So
just seems like something that would be easily overlooked if you weren't looking.
that's why you learn to look down here or look over there. And actually, half the time, dropping tables is not something I do a lot. That's dangerous, right? I just deleted a whole table. Hope I have a good reason for that. We do it here because we're learning. But you're right. It's a little subtle that it's only down here. But if I now try to describe marinas again, I get an error down at the bottom going, never heard of it. There's your proof. It's gone. And notice the error. I know it's small for those of you in the cheap seats, but it does say that Alexamar Marinas, that table, doesn't exist. All right, it's a good overview. When we come back on Thursday, we'll continue with that, learn how to add some different types of fields, and then once we get the fields in, start adding data. That's our goal for this year. Keep plugging away on those designs. Sooner the better. But again, my advice is get design 1 done, return it, get it to me, and wait for your response before you turn in design 2. Let's do this on the recording as well. You're not done yet. Got to close the workbench. If you still have the control panel open, by the way, this is what I normally do. I close it. If you close it, the window goes away, but it's still running. Okay, and notice the icon is gone, but it's still running. It's here in my tray. Let's bring that up so you can see it. It's still here in my tray. Remember, I mentioned this before the recording, I'll do it again. If this disappears, it'll show up here, but if it does that, my advice is customize and choose show icon and notifications both. It will never disappear that way. It will always sit in your tray. You cannot eject your USB drive until the portable apps menu is closed. If you can't see it, you can always right-click it here and exit it. And you must stop all the servers you've got running. So I'm going to open that back up again and stop my SQL server. And you must quit. Quit means kill the program and even remove it from the tray. That's really bad if it's still running if you got one of these, because that will cause all kinds of trouble. So once you get everything stopped, then quit. Now you should be able to eject. If you can't eject, my notes usually say launch XAMPP again. Very possible that even though you said quit, maybe you double clicked and it quit, and before you stopped looking, it turned it right back on again. But you should be able to, at this point, eject and go on. So be careful, because you've got a lot of stuff running here that's running off of that stick that could be hiding in the tray. Make sure you stop it all before you pull that stick out.